Alright guys, Miss Humanek here, and now today I'm going to talk to you guys about how to solve quadratic equations by factoring, okay? And so what you'll notice is for this particular problem, the very first thing you do, remember, whenever you're encountered with an equation, is you put it in your calculator, or you put it in Desmos.com, right? So you say 2x squared minus 9x minus 5, and then we hit graph. So we want to see what this quadratic equation looks like. And we see here that it does cross to the x-axis. So there are going to be two solutions in this case. And I'm going to go to my table here, and I'm going to try to find whenever my y is equal to 0. Well, look at that. My y was positive, and then it jumps to a negative. So that means one of my y values is going to have to be, when it's equal to 0, it's going to be somewhere between -1 and 0. Interesting. And then is there ever another time where my y, so one of my solutions is going to be 5, 0. But we don't know what the other one is, all right? So we're going to have to do some extra things. So this does not give us clean x-intercepts. It gives us one clean x-intercept, but it doesn't give us the other one. So guys, we can solve quadratics by factoring. And that is because of this lovely zero product property rule, all right? And so the zero product property tells us that if a product of two quantities equals 0, at least one of those quantities must be 0. So for example, if we had n times t is equal to 0, then either, oh man, I'm struggling with my spelling. Either n would equal to 0 or t would be equal to 0, right? So if n times t is equal to 0, then either n equals 0 or t equals 0. Because if it was 0 times t, we would get 0, or n times 0 would also give us 0. And so guys, what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to break down our quadratic equation into two factors, and then we will set them both equal to 0 because of that zero product property. All right, and so remember, a very important thing that we do in this circumstance is we have to recognize our 2x squared. We have to recognize that our a is 2, okay, whenever we're factoring. Our b is equal to that -9, the coefficient of our x, and then our c is over here, which is equal to that constant, that -5, all right? And whenever we're factoring, first of all, you have to note the first step is it must be in standard form. It must be x squared, ax squared plus bx plus c, all right? So it must be the x squared x in the c form, all right? Remember, whenever you factor, the first thing you do is you put your first term in your first box, whenever I do it with the box method, and then I always put my last term in the last box. But we're going to need to split up this -9x term. So here's a quick review on factoring if you guys don't remember. In order to find our middle two terms here, what we are going to need to do is we're going to need to break up our terms here. So we do a times c, so in this case it would be -10, and then b would be always, b is on the bottom, so in this case that's that -9. So now we're going to look for our middle two terms here, and so we look here and we say, okay, what two numbers multiply to -10 but add up to -9? And remember guys, there's a fun little trick you can do with your calculator if you're looking for factors here. You can always do, we want to find the factors of -10, so we can do -10 divided by x. If we go to our factors here, we can see that all of these numbers will give us that -10 when they multiply by each other. And right here we see that 1 times -10 would also give us -9 when we add them together. So that means our two factors, the winners, are this 1 and -10. So now we can go ahead and we can put in a 1x and a -10x to replace that -9x. once we have that, we can go ahead and factor out our greatest common factor. So we would say, okay, 2x squared and 10x, what factors does it have in common? Well, they both have an x, but then they are also both divisible by 2. 2 is divisible by 2, and negative 10 is divisible by 2. Then we go this way, and we go between 2 and 1x, and they both have a common factor of x. All right, and then we go here, and we say, okay, well, what's our common factor between 1x and negative 5? Well, that's just going to be a 1. Also, you can think to yourself, x times what gives us 1x? Well, x times 1 gives us 1x. And then 2x times what will give us negative 10x? Well, guys, it's going to be negative 5. Remember, if your leading coefficient here is a negative, then you're going to pull out a negative. So that means that my 2 factors are right here, the numbers on the outside. So we can set 2x plus 1 and x minus 5. And remember, they are equal to 0. And so now what we can do is we can set each one equal to 0. So we can say, all right, well, each factor, because remember, either our first factor is going to be equal to 0, 2x plus 1, or our second factor is going to be equal to 0. All right, so first let's go ahead and solve. Now we just solve for x. So we're going to subtract 1 from both sides, and we get, let's see here, 2x equals negative 1. We divide both sides by 2, so my x is equal to negative 1/2 in this case. And then also, well, this one's nice. All you have to do is add 5 to both sides. Remember, I guess I can draw my little lines there. And we just have x is equal to 5. Well, that's nice. So our two answers are x is negative 1/2 and x is equal to 5. And we can also write that, remember, as negative 1/2, 0, and 5, 0. So we can write it as x equals the value, or we can write it as our y-intercepts. And guys, if we go back into our calculator and we retype this guy in there, the 2x squared minus 9x minus 5, and we hit graph, we will see that our y-intercepts, are about negative 1/2, and then that other one we already knew was going to be 5, 0. Remember from our table there, right? We already knew it was going to be at 5, 0. So that is super good for us to see. And so guys, whenever you want to check your answers, make sure that you graph it on your calculator to check it, all right? You can always graph it on the calculator to check your answer. You can also plug this x value back into your original equation and it will give you 0. The same would be true if you plugged in your 5. It would also give you 0. All right, so now I'm going to do a few more examples to just help us remember to factor here, all right? So when I look at this, we see that my a value on this one is 4, my b value is 20, and then my c value is 25. So we have our a value of 4, our b value of 20, and our c value of 25. So now we can go ahead and fill out our little chart here. So a times c would be 4 times 25, which is 100. And then my b value is 20. Oh, but before I get too far, I like to fill in my first term, 4x squared, and then plus 25. So we need to just think about how we're splitting this middle term here. And so when we do that, we can think, okay, what two numbers multiply together to give me 100 but add up to get 20? Well, that's actually not too bad. It's going to be 10 and 10. Because 10 times 10 is 100, but 10 plus 10 is 20. So this one is going to be split up into 10x and 10x, or 20x just got split into 10x and 10x. So now I can put plus 10x, And now we can pull out our factors. So we'll look here and we'll say, okay, 4x squared and 10x. Well, they both have an x in common. And then the other common factor between 4 and 10, they are both evenly divisible by 2. And then the same will be true of 4x squared and 10x here. They both have the greatest common factor they have in common, they're both divisible by, is 2. And 2x times 2x is 4x squared. And then 2x times what will give me 10x? Well, 2x times 5. 2 times 5 is 10, and then x. Also, 5 is the greatest common factor that is divisible by both 10 and 25. And look at this. We're actually doing this one twice here. 2x times what gives me 10x? This should kind of feel like deja vu. So now we have 2 factors here, and I want you to notice that this is actually the same exact factor pair, 2x plus 5 and 2x plus 5. So we can write it as 2x plus 5 squared. So guys, remember, these are the same factor pairs. And so guys, when this happens, we can just say, well, 2x plus 5 is equal to 0. Because if 2x plus 5 squared is equal to 0, if you take the square root of both sides, square root of 0 is 0. And so we only have to do this one time. So then we go here, and we're going to subtract 5. We're going to solve for x from both sides. So we say 2x is equal to negative 5. We divide both sides by 2, and my x is equal to negative 5/2. Okay? We can also write that as a ordered pair, which is negative 5/2 parentheses 0. So that we can write our solutions both ways here. All right, we can write our solutions those lovely ways. And it's super important to remember that, guys, if the 2 factors are the same, there is only one solution. And guys, we actually see this to be true because you know what I forgot to do? I forgot to graph it. That's the first thing you're always supposed to do. Whoops. And so if you type this in, 4x squared plus 20x plus 25, we graph this, we are going to see that there's only one solution because it's right there on the graph. If we go to our table, unfortunately, it is not easily listed, right? There is no y value where it's 0, but it is right there between negative 2 and negative 3, and negative 5/2 is negative 2.5. So we would be right in the middle of those two right there. All right, so now what I'm going to do is for number 2, I'm going to go ahead and graph this right away to begin with. And I'm going to say 2x squared plus x minus 3. And we are going to hit graph. We're going to see what it looks like. So this tells us that it hits the graph twice. So we are going to have 2 solutions. If I go to my table, let's see if they're even solutions. Well, those are big numbers. So let's see going, oh, look, it goes from a positive to a negative. So my zeros fall somewhere between my negative 1 and my negative 2. And then, oh, so we have one of our solutions. One of our solutions is going to be 1, 0, but we need to find out the other solution. So we can do that by factoring. So again, what we are going to do is we are going to identify our a value, which in this case is 2. I'm also going to go ahead and put my 2x squared right here. My b value, which in this case is 1, right? It's that understood 1. And then my c value is my constant here. My c is negative 3. I'm also going to go ahead and put my negative 3 right into my box. So a times c is negative 6. My b value is 1. So we need to think of the 2 factors that multiply to negative 6 that add up to 1. So in this case, it would be positive 3 and negative 2. 3 times negative 2 gives you negative 6. 3 minus 2 gives me positive 1. So that means that my 1x is split up into 3x minus 2x. So we can go ahead and put that in our box as positive 3x and minus 2x. And now we can go ahead and factor out. If I factor out horizontally first, 2x squared and 3x, the only factor they are both divisible by is x. 2x squared and 2x, they're both divisible by x, and they're also both divisible by 2. 2x times x is 2x squared. Then x times what will give me 3. That would be a positive 3. And you also see that 3 and 3 are both divisible by 3. And then 2x times what gives me a negative 2x, and that would be a negative 1. Also, you see the only factor that these guys are both divisible by is going to be a 1. And because that coefficient is negative 2, it's going to be a negative 1. So now we have our two factors here. So that becomes 2x plus 3 and x minus 1. And remember, it's equal to 0. So we're just rewriting the simplified form as our factored form. And now we are going to set 2x plus 3 equal to 0. And we're going to set x minus 1 equal to 0. Sorry about that. So now we'll go ahead and solve for our x. So we subtract 3 on both sides over here. So that becomes 2x equals negative 3. Divide both sides by 2. And we have x equals negative 3/2. And so we can go ahead and write that. We'll write it in just a second. So that is one of our solutions. And then also we can add 1 to both sides. And we get x is equal to 1. So our two solutions are negative 3/2 and 1. We can also write these as our coordinate points, our ordered pairs, negative 3/2, 0, and 1, 0. And if we look back on our graph to check our answers, go to y equals, we see that, yep, it's about at negative 3/2, and it's at 1. And we knew one of our answers was going to be 1, 0 right there. And then we can see that, yeah, it would be right there between negative 1 and negative 2. Negative 3/2, isn't it? Remember, negative 1.5. So those are our solutions here, okay? So now let's move on to 3 through 6. And I do want you guys to try some of these guys on your own. I'm going to do number 3 and number 5 with you guys. I want you guys to do number 4 and number 6 on your own. And then as you guys have any questions, we can, and you can check the key for that on there, all right? And so let's see here. So for number 3, we are going to identify our A, our B, and our C. Well, our A value in this case is 4, so I'm going to say 4x squared. Ooh, our B value, there's no x, so that means that our B is equal to 0. All right, but then our C value, our constant, so there's no x, so it's just equal to 0. But our C is equal to negative 9, okay? So in this case, we have our A, and then our B, and then our C. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to write my C down here, negative 9. And so guys, this means that A times C is what? Negative 36. And then my B value is just 0. So we want to think of the two numbers that are going to multiply to negative 36 but add up to 0. So that would be a positive 6 and a negative 6. So guys, this 0 number becomes plus 6x minus 6x. So we are going to have our 6x and our minus 6x. And when we factor out our lovely numbers here, 4x squared and x, well, they are both divisible by x. They have a common factor of x. And then they are both divisible, 4 and 6. The greatest common factor they share is 2. They are both evenly divisible by 2. And then the same will be true actually for these guys as well, right? They're both divisible by x. Take that out of both of them. And then they both have the greatest common factor of 2. So, and remember, 2x times 2x is 4x squared. And then 2x, let's see here, times what is going to give me positive 6? Well, 2x times 3. 2 times 3 gives me 6. And then 2x times what gives me negative 6? Well, that's negative 3. Check this out. Negative 3 times positive 3 gives me negative 9. So now we have our two factors here, and we can write them out as 2x minus 3 and 2x plus 3 equals 0. And so we see here that if we were going to set them each individually equal to 0, we would say 2x minus 3 equals 0, and then 2x plus 3 equals 0. So for this guy on the left, we're going to add 3 to both sides. So my 2x is equal to 3, divide by 2, divide by 2, and my x will be equal to 3/2. All right, so that is one of my x values. Then we're going to subtract 3 from both sides, and we have 2x equals negative 3, divide both sides by negative 2, and now x is equal to negative 3/2. So we can write it as 3/2 or negative 3/2. And remember, so this means that our two solutions are 3/2, 0, and negative 3/2, 0. Oh no, and you know what I forgot to do on this one? I forgot to graph it. So let's go ahead and do that. So we can see here that we have 4x squared minus 9. And when we graph it, we see, oh yay, it does go through it twice. And it looks like it goes right through it, negative 1/2 and positive 1/2. And so if we look here on the table, we also see that that's true. It goes from a positive value to a negative value. So my 0 will be somewhere between there. And then this goes from a negative value to a positive value. So my other 0 will be between right there. So we couldn't find any of our zeros on the table, but we can see that they're there on the graph, and that matches the values that we got here. All right, and so yes, don't forget, you can always graph your equation. So I want you guys to try that with number 4 and see how you guys do. All right, and when you do that, yeah, you can pause the video and try to do number 4. All right, and then we're going to jump down here to number 5. All right, so let's see here. Oh, something is a little fishy about number 5. We are not in quadratic standard form, are we? We are not set it equal to 0, so we need to be equal to 0. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to get this negative 2x squared off the side so it can be equal to 0. So I'm going to subtract my negative 2x squared from both sides, subtract from x squared, and we are left with x squared plus 4x plus 5 is equal to 0. So this is going to be the equation that we're going to work with. What we see here is we have what? Our a is equal to just 1. It's that understood 1. And we can always go ahead and write that in our first box here. Our b is equal to this 4. And our c is equal to this positive 5. So I'm going to go ahead and put this here. And so a times c for the top of my x, we want to find our middle term and how we split up this lovely 4x. We're going to see how we split it up. And a times c is what? 5. And then my b value is 4. So we need to find two numbers that multiply to 5 but add up to 4. So if we want to go ahead and do that, we want to find our factors. Well, let's think here. What are my factors of 5? Well, 1 times 5 is 5, but 1 plus 5 is 6. Well, that's not good. And those are the only factors. So time out. There are no factors in here that are going to add up. Let's go ahead and graph this just to see what we have. We're going to graph this guy right here because it has to be equal to 0 if you want to graph it. So I'm going to graph x squared plus 4x plus 5. Oh, and would you look at that? Sure enough, it never hits the x-axis. So this is not factorable because it never hits the x-axis. So this one, you cannot solve by factoring. So this one means that no numbers will work to complete the x. So guys, this one you can't actually solve by factoring. And if you look here, this is because there's no solutions. Now, sometimes you will be given a problem where you can't solve it by factoring, and there are still solutions. And we are going to teach you guys how to find the answers for this one. But in this case, there are actually no solutions for this one. So now, guys, I want you guys to go ahead and try number 6. And guys, numbers 4 and 6, they both have real solutions, and I'll show them to you in just a second. I want you guys to pause it, try number 4 and 6, and see how you did on your own. All right, so hopefully you were able to do those on your own, and I have some that are complete here, so I'm going to let you guys take a look at this. For number 4, this is what number 4 in our answers were, that x equals 2/3 and x is equal to 1. And that was 2/3 0 and 1 0. All right. You guys can pause it right there and double check your work. And then on number 6, we see over here that our two values were x is equal to -3 and x is equal to 2/3. So our two solutions were -3 0 and 2/3 0. So I hope that this worked for you guys, and good luck on your homework tonight, and yeah, we'll continue to solve quadratic equations throughout the rest of the unit.